Media recognition from Bloomberg, Reuters, recycling trade publications. Patented process for 100% recovery of critical metals, including cobalt, lithium, nickel, manganese, aluminum. American Manganese is focused on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. American Manganese trades on the TSX Venture, AMY, the US, AMYZF, and Frankfurt 2AM. For more information, visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Stewart Muir, Executive Director of the Resource Works Society. Welcome back to the show, Stewart.
Hey, thanks, Jim.
Stewart, we're now into a federal election campaign in Canada. What kind of issues should the candidates be talking about when it comes to natural resources?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not under the illusion that resources and the export economy is ever going to be a big issue in most federal elections, and this one's no exception. However, there is a very important national priority here that the base of our economy is protected, preserved, and strengthened over time. That comes from natural resources. So it's really, really important to me and lots of other people, and I'm watching it closely. Like I say, I think other issues, maybe inflation, wage inflation. We've seen these new numbers, I think 3.7% inflation. It means that groceries, clothing, all the basic necessities of life are getting more expensive. You're feeling that every day, and it's just shocking, some of the things you buy. Not everything. I mean, gasoline, even though it's a little pricey, it's actually, compared to other things that have increased, those have increased way more. And fuel is not so expensive. But when you have inflation like that, you're literally removing people from the middle class as they are priced out of being able to afford things like housing because they're spending more on just putting food on the table. But when it comes to resources, certainly I've had a look at the policy of the opposition party. I mean, we know what the Liberal Party of Canada stands for. They've been in government since 2015, so we don't really need to speculate on their policies on resources. They're plain to see. Looking at the Conservative platform, I think the biggest change from the last election is that under the new leadership of Erin O'Toole, they have gotten to grips with climate change, at least at the policy level. Yeah, they do have some issues with unifying the whole membership around that, but not too surprising given the diversity of the country and some of the economic regions. But when it comes to actual policy, I'm quite impressed by a few things we're seeing. I mean, they're providing a contrast to the Liberals on the climate issue, which affects the resource economy, because they're just more market driven, a little more like the American approach. I mean, it's interesting that although in Canada most of our elected leaders love to talk about carbon taxes, and now going up to $170 a ton for carbon emissions. In the U.S., they don't do that. They just say, we're going to let the market solve this. We're going to get out of the way. And lo and behold, they do. Texas has become a powerhouse of wind energy. Who would expect that years ago? Not because they were forced to by carbon pricing, but because there were incentives and opportunities that were pursued. And I think the Conservatives are much closer to the American philosophy. Joe Biden, he's a progressive. He's kind of on that center left, just like our current Prime Minister. But he's not talking about carbon taxes. They will never do a federal carbon tax in the U.S. over Biden's dead body. So it doesn't mean that they're ignoring the climate, though. You don't hear anyone saying they are. And so the Conservatives, I think, are quite realistic in adopting solutions like that. If you look into carbon capture, hydrogen, they really want to drive those as a way to decarbonize. But they're also seeing some of the more basic fundamental issues. For example, they are, in the current platform, they're opposing Bill C-48. That's the tanker ban, which was brought in by the Liberals to stop ships carrying crude oil and other kinds of liquid petroleum products from the northwest coast of BC, not from the St. Lawrence River or the Bay of Fundy or other environmentally sensitive areas or the Salish Sea. They're just focused on that because it's a direct hit on Alberta. They wanted to, I think, stop Alberta from developing its resources. That's certainly what the Alberta Premier has said. He calls the measures brought in under the Liberals. You might remember this phrase. He talked about it a lot. Jason Kenney did. the No More Pipelines bill, and that is a reference to Bill C-69, which is another one. So not only are the Conservatives saying they will roll back the ban on tankers, which will cost if they don't do that, the country will be probably a couple of $1 trillion poorer over the next 40, 50 years because it can't get its energy to markets. But when it comes to Bill C-69, they're saying, look, we're not going to repeal the bill that brought about the new Canada Energy Regulator, but they're going to tweak it. Now, you might remember a few years ago, all the protest organizations said that the National Energy Board, which has been around since the 1950s, was no good and biased, so they had to get rid of it. The Liberals said, hey, okay, we better do that. And they did. They brought in the Canada Energy Regulator instead. This was supposed to take the politics out of project decision-making. But we have a new independent study just come out from the University of Ottawa saying, actually, Canada Energy Regulator is worse in terms of the politicking. So this is the complaint that the Conservatives have as well. But like I say, Jim, I just don't think these issues are going to loom large in the election. We know that they're there. They've thought carefully on this, and it's going to be fought on other fronts in all likelihood.
Now, resource jobs, whether it's logging or working in the oil patch, they all tend to be well-paying jobs. What are the alternatives? Are we all to become a nation of baristas?
Yeah, I mean, we could trade prosperity for, a less prosperous way of life. We could do that, and that, there's a lot of people who want to have the country adopt the miraculous reformist proposals. Let's move to tourism. Well, tourism jobs pay less than half of the jobs in the resource sector. I was just looking at the latest stats for BC. If you're a resource worker in forestry or natural gas or mining in BC, your hourly wage is north of $40. If you're in the tourism industry, you're getting under $19 an hour. If you're lucky, if you're the average worker, your hourly wage is around $30. So having those bigger paychecks, does it make a difference? Well, of course it makes a difference, because those people who earn those checks, whether they work in Fort Mac or work in the Northeast, or they're professionals supporting the resource industry because they work in a law firm or accounting or transportation or all these things, they're pulling down a good dollar, and they're bringing those checks home, and they're paying their mortgages, and they're buying stuff and putting their kids in dance closets and all that. I mean, it trickles right through the economy very quickly. It's the most efficient way we have, actually, of the resource economy affecting national prosperity, just by the goods and services economy, people spending money. And that's one thing you tend to do when you've got more of it, more disposable income. So the idea that we can just dispose of it and get rid of this sector or greatly reduce the sector and it won't make a difference is kind of a fairy tale. We need to have those jobs. And also, the other side of it is that the world needs the products that Canada produces. It's not as if no one wants to buy lumber and pulp and copper and natural gas and oil. These are things they use in everyday life, and they need to get it from somewhere. Canada's a preferred supplier. We're stable. We're a good place to invest. We have the rule of law. We have the highest ESG standards in the world, and there's really no better place to be sourcing these things from. So, getting away from that economy to what? I mean, if someone is saying to you, listener, all we have to do is make a decision, get out of the way. We're going to build this new economy. Well, we've had 20 years of rhetoric. Since I was a business journalist in Vancouver, everyone wanted to talk about tech and the new economy. I love technology. I'm actually involved in a biotech startup. I'm a big believer in tech, but it was a relatively small part of the economy then. It's a relatively small part of the economy now. Forestry alone is, I think, 18% of the base economy of BC. Tech, high tech is 6%. So it's 3 times as big. That's not even including the other parts of the resource economy in BC that are 50% of the economy.
We'll have more with Stewart Muir right after this.
Media recognition from Bloomberg, Reuters, recycling trade publications, patented process for 100% recovery of critical metals, including cobalt, lithium, nickel, manganese, aluminum. American Manganese is focused on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. American Manganese trades on the TSX Venture, AMY, the US, AMYZF, and Frankfurt 2AM. For more information, visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Stewart Muir. Stewart, if you were in politics and looking at natural resources, how could they be used to power Canada's recovery?
Yeah. There's so many opportunities we have to elevate our use of natural resources in a sustainable way that benefits the people. And I'll give you an example. This is one I'm thinking about a lot right now. It's LNG, which stands for liquefied natural gas. We have a great deal of natural gas in British Columbia in the Northeast, and across Western Canada there's lots more gas. And it is a lower carbon form of fuel that can be used for all kinds of things. But actually not just fuel, not just for power plants to generate cleaner electricity. It could also be used, and is used, in manufacturing fertilizer, plastics, all kinds of things. It's amazing what chemistry has done to enable these feedstocks to be converted into the things we use, But LNG is a great example because we have so much, and it's something that the world wants. We have LNG Canada, the $40 billion project that's being built in Kitimat. We have the wood fiber LNG in Squamish. These represent a way to get a cleaner, desirable molecule to where it's needed. But recently, we saw the Quebec government reject a very good LNG project, Saguenay LNG, on an argument that, I found kind of perplexing. They said, you can't export this LNG because you can't prove to us that it will be used to substitute more emissions-intense forms of fuel. You can't prove that to us, so we're not going to approve your project. Now, let me ask, Bombardier in Quebec, they're getting our dollars, tax dollars, as subsidies to build aircraft that are going to have 20 years in service, burning kerosene, jet fuel, around the world, resulting in emissions. I don't see the Premier of Quebec saying we can't have an aviation industry in Quebec because it's going to create, for sure, emissions in the world. He's not saying that. He's just saying, Ottawa, give us another truckload of money, merci beaucoup. And guess what? They do. They back the truck right up. They drive it from Ottawa to Hull, right across the bridge. Well, no, they don't, but they may as well, and tip it over into Quebec. This is the double standard we're seeing, the hypocrisy of Confederation. I think it's why a lot of people are, kind of upset with the current imbalance of how benefits of Confederation are distributed. Here, on the one hand, you've got federal policies that actively prohibit or punish things that are good for the environment, like LNG. At the same time, is rewarding people like Quebec who are sending their electricity from northern Quebec into New York State without being as accountable as some groups want them to be on that, but then they're pointing the finger at other Canadians for providing a cleaner form of fuel. So anyways, I won't ramble on about that, but I think this is a big issue, and what it calls for, and here's my idea, is a federal task force on LNG. The Conservatives, they're talking about a federal LNG export strategy because I suspect they're seeing the same as I'm seeing. And, we've got all these issues. Having a province override projects in the national interest is not supposed to be how things work, but it's working now. And again, I think it validates this argument that Bill C-69 did not provide a clean solution. We need to go back on that and figure out how we stop climate progress for the globe from being stopped by the Premier of Quebec by making bad, very narrow-minded and selfish political decisions, appealing to, a few voters in Montreal. So this is something that's worth committing to because they look at the States right now. They're short of natural gas. Gas prices have gone up. It's explosive. It's actually really good for Canadian energy producers who are having a bonanza year thanks to this. But in the U.S., the mantra has been we're getting away from coal-generated electricity. They've got some of the biggest coal plants in the world in the United States. There's one plant I looked at in Chicago, the coal-fired electricity plant that fires Greater Chicago. It alone equals all of the emissions from the oil sands. So even though you've got these very precious investors from Europe pointing the finger at the Canadian oil sands saying, you're bad, Do they ever point the finger at Chicago and say, your one plant is bigger than all of the Athabasca oil sands emissions. You should do something about that. No, what's actually happening right now is that because natural gas is so expensive in the States, is that the coal companies, you can check this out, it's true, are seeing a resurgence of coal sales. I would not have predicted this a couple of months ago, even a couple of weeks ago, but it's happening right now. So they're dropping natural gas in favor of more emissions-intense coal. Thanks very much. The fact we can't get natural gas to market in places where it's needed, it just means more coal is going to be burned. Thank you, Premier Legault of Quebec. You're a climate hero. Well, he's not.
Why is Quebec so... It seems to me Quebec doesn't even make it a secret. They hate Alberta for some reason, and yet they don't hesitate to take transfer payment money from Alberta.
Yeah, well, that's what I was going to say. They don't hate everything about Alberta. They love Alberta's money, but they hate having to admit that they are part of an energy system that is working furiously to improve itself. I mean, recently we saw the big Canadian-based oil sands producers make the declaration. I'm talking about, Cenovus, CNRL, and Suncor, these big domestic producers that are in all of our pension funds, guaranteed, creating dividends for us. We need them to be healthy, for the country to be healthy. They committed to net zero by 2050, and they're investing billions of dollars in that. I saw a report out of one of the high-minded financial newspapers from Europe. They just sneer at that stuff. They don't care. They would rather literally get Saudi oil. They prefer to have a theocratic state run by one guy who murders his enemies and chops them into unrecognizable pieces. They would rather get the oil from that guy than from Canadians. I mean, thanks, Biden. We really appreciate that. We can see you value us as neighbors. Thank you so much. This is our current situation where the efforts we're making in Canada aren't being recognized. Now, let's not flail around and despair about this. We need to do something about it. We need to communicate it. I mean, a lot of it comes down to getting that right. I mean, years ago, people in the oil industry talk about the really dumb move someone made many years ago to drive a giant a giant oil sands truck. One of those things, I've been up to them in Fort McMurray. They're giant, the size of your house, a truck that carries the sands over to where they process it. They've got one of those onto the mall in Washington to say, hey, look, we're doing this great stuff in northern Canada. It turned out that became a symbol of the stuff people hate about it because the gargantuan scale of the oil sands. Even though you look at a map, it's not really that big an area. When you go and stand there as a human, in human scale terms, the equipment is big, and that's sort of a negative because people say, oh, that doesn't look very environmentally friendly. And so I think as we communicate in the future, we should be talking about the innovation that's happening, the move to in situ, which is where they use wells to drill down and then they run hot water, push it through underground. They're also using solvents and different things that they recycle so it doesn't go into the environment to get that oil out of the ground with less energy. The thing about the oil sands is that the higher emissions that they do have are caused by the extraction process. It's not the oil itself. It's just heavy oil, the same as any other heavy oil. Heavy oil actually produces more gasoline per barrel in a refinery with less waste at the end. So it's actually, believe it or not, it's a bit of a mind bender, but it's actually a cleaner environmental product in that sense. But it does have higher emissions in another sense. But in terms of those production emissions, we're pushing them down by using in situ. We're also pushing it down kind of like the way a factory continuously improves. I mean, if you're a smart factory owner, you're always looking for ways to cut your energy usage, to streamline your production line, all that, to upskill your workers so you've got more efficiency. You never stop doing that. The oil sands are the same. It's not like they have to go and drill a new well every day to keep the oil flowing, because that sand is exposed by a mining process or by in situ drilling. They know where it is. And so they can make plans for decades of how they improve and reduce the carbon footprint. That's something that's kind of lost on the opponents of oil, who might admit that the world needs oil, because it does, but they don't want Canada to be part of that. Even if it's the cleanest, most improving oil in the world. And the latter point, I ask anyone to dispute that Canada is the most improving nation in the world, because other countries are just happy to drill it and ship it. They're not doing anything to make it more environmentally desirable, but Canada is investing billions in that.
Is the forestry industry in BC under siege?
Well, I'm concerned by a new report we've seen comes out of a conference at UBC on the effect of potentially reducing or eliminating old growth forestry. I know that term old growth, a lot of people that hear that and their heads explode. Oh, we should cut down those beautiful ancient trees. When you look into the forestry science, and I spent a lot of time on this topic, you realize that the facts of it are just way more complicated. I mean, you get into discussion with some of the forest scientists, the professional foresters or the scientific researchers in forestry. We have a lot of them at places like UBC in particular. This is in BC. We've got 200,000 jobs from forestry in BC, and as of 20 years ago, as of now, it's been cut in half to 100,000. There's a new report in Business in Vancouver I'm looking at. There's been a huge reduction in the forest sector, and the warning bell now is that we could see a greater reduction, even further, of these jobs, which are some of the best, highest-paying jobs. Part of it is pine beetles. We've already had a number of mills go down, quite a number of mills go down because of pine beetles. That's a factor beyond any person's or policymakers' control. But on the coast, where we don't have the pine beetle problem, we have other problems. We have these socio-cultural issues of this ongoing campaign against what's called old growth forestry, and that could cost us a lot of jobs. That could mean that whole towns on the coast are essentially without an economic purpose, and when that happens, we know what follows. So this is a really important issue, and I think if you're in Powell River, Port Alberta, and Nanaimo, you look at the pulp mills, you look at the sawmills in the Cowichan Valley. Those are at risk if we have policies that reduce access to this mixed-age forest, and that's a big concern for people who live in those places and who depend on a healthy forest economy.
What can we do to make sure that we're not going to lose mills in BC? Yeah,
that's a good question, because there are things we can do. It's not a hopeless situation. And just one of the reality checks is that there is an enormous amount of old growth that will never be logged. And one of the things I've found in my research is that if you look at where the old growth is in BC on the coast, close to Vancouver, there's virtually no old growth around Vancouver that you can go and see if you live in Vancouver or one of the 20 municipalities around there. There might be a little bit here and there, I suppose, but it's not really a discernible amount. Same is true on Vancouver Island. If you look at the east coast of the island, from Campbell River on down south on that desirable coast where people want to live and do live in density, all the way down to Victoria, there's no old growth. You can't walk out your door or drive a reasonable distance to see old growth forests because they're not there. They were logged 100 years ago. But that doesn't mean there's no old growth on the island. In fact, there's a vast amount, millions of hectares of old growth. And the problem is, the perception problem is that to go and see it and recognize that it's there requires extraordinary effort. So a lot of it is in parks. I mean, an interesting thing from the 1990s, when there was a big preservationist movement that resulted in a lot of the original forest being essentially locked up in parks, is that forestry, which would normally be an industry that builds roads and leaves roads, so those roads can allow people to go and access tourism sites, camping, things like that. If there's no forest industry in the area, there's no roads unless the province decides to build them, and they typically haven't done that. So all these parks that we have, no one ever gets to see unless you are one of that tiny number who maybe hike the West Coast Trail and go up for days on end with your own food and everything. Well, very few people ever do that and see it. The same on the North Island, all the way up to the west coast of the island, you've got this vast amount of old growth. So I do think that one of the reasons is just perception, because we don't see it in front of our noses. We think it doesn't exist, but that's simply not true. Another thing is the huge amount of old growth. Not every old growth tree is one of those, Greenpeace calendar worthy pictures of a enormous old cedar that appeals to us emotionally because it's such a beautiful thing. Most of it is smaller but still big. On Vancouver Island, just if you look at coastal hemlock trees on the coast that are over 100 feet, you've got 1.6 million hectares or more, 1.7 million hectares of trees of that size. And that's big. That's like a 6+ story building. There's 75,000 hectares of trees on the island that are bigger than a 13-story building. It's quite a contrast from the mailers and the emails and the social media posts where you've got groups saying, the last old growth tree is about to be harvested. You must stop Victoria from allowing this. It's really balderdash when you hear those talking points, and they're meant to inflame people and get them upset. I mean, if it was true, I'd be upset, but it's just so far from being true. I'm more upset that this misinformation is being circulated than I am that there's actually a danger to old growth.
Stewart, thank you so much for chatting with us.
Thanks, Jim.
My guest has been Stewart Muir, Executive Director of the ResourceWorks Society. His website, resourceworks.com. You can find him on Twitter at SJMuir. If you have any questions for Stewart, we'll ask them for you if you send them to info@howstreet.com. Our YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. Find us on Twitter at HowStreet. We're also on Facebook. I'm Jim Goddard. Thank you for listening.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.